Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the cold breathes and the dark listens. Tonight we're bound for Alaska, land of endless snowfields, ghost towns under ice, and roads that end without warning. Up here, silence isn't empty, it's alive, waiting. The stories you're about to hear are true, drawn from legends, and whispered by those who swore they'd never tell. Subscribe now and tap the bell so the next time we drift into the cold, you're with us. Pull your blanket close, dim the lights, and let the first tale rise like a storm over the tundra. Story 1. Horse knew what happened to its rider. The horse was saddled when they found it, reins dragging through the snow, and the saddle was still warm. I need to tell you about something that happened in the Alaskan wilderness in 1991. Something that the state troopers officially closed as a missing person case, but unofficially still talk about in hushed voices at retirement parties. My name is David Sorensen, and I was one of the troopers who found that horse. I was also the one who followed its tracks back to where the rider disappeared. And what I saw there doesn't make sense no matter how many times I run through it in my head. It was late March, that weird time in Alaska when winter refuses to let go but spring is pushing back, creating unpredictable weather that can kill you if you're not careful. We got a call from a hunting lodge near the Chulitna River, about 80 miles north of Anchorage. A guest had spotted a riderless horse wandering near the property, fully tacked up, acting strange. The lodge owner had managed to catch it and was keeping it in their stable, but nobody recognized the animal or the gear. I drove out with my partner Jim, expecting a simple case. Someone got thrown, walked back to civilization, forgot to mention their horse. Happens more than you think. But when we arrived and saw the animal, something felt wrong immediately. The horse was a bay gelding, maybe 15 hands, well cared for with expensive tack. Western saddle, good leather, saddlebags still attached and buckled shut. But the horse was terrified, not spooked like an animal that had been running loose, but genuinely traumatized, eyes rolling white, flinching at every sound. The lodge owner said it had been standing at the tree line for over an hour before he approached it, just staring into the forest like it was watching something. When I opened the saddlebags, I found the usual trail riding supplies. Water bottle, energy bars, a first aid kit, maps of the area. But I also found something that made my skin crawl. A camera, one of those disposable ones people used back then. And it had been used. The counter showed 23 of 24 pictures taken. We searched the area around the lodge, called out, checked all the trails. Nothing. No signs of a rider, no reports of anyone missing. We put out notices to local stables and outfitters, but nobody claimed the horse. It was like the animal had materialized out of nowhere, carrying the ghost of a rider who never existed. Then Jim noticed something. The horse, his hooves were packed with snow and ice, but it was a specific type of buildup that only happens when you've been walking through deep powder for miles. This horse had come from somewhere remote, somewhere far from any maintained trail. We decided to backtrack it. Stupid decision in retrospect, but we were younger then, thought we were invincible. We loaded the horse in a trailer, drove as far up the logging roads as we could, then set out on snowmobiles following the tracks while they were still visible. The trail led us deep into the wilderness, away from any marked paths, into country so remote you could die and never be found. The tracks were clear in the snow, a single set of hoofprints meandering through the trees, sometimes circling back on themselves like the horse had been confused or searching for something. After about 6 miles, we found where the horse had stopped and stood in one place for a long time. The snow was trampled down, frozen solid by repeated hooves in the same spot. And 20 feet away, we found the first sign of the rider. A single boot, expensive hiking boot, men, this size 10, still laced up tight. But here is what made us both go silent. The boot was standing upright in the snow, perfectly positioned like someone had carefully placed it there. And there were no footprints around it. No sign of a struggle, no tracks showing someone removing their boot. Just the boot, standing alone in the middle of nowhere. Jim wanted to call for backup right then, get search and rescue involved, but I convinced him to keep looking. The rider might be injured nearby, might need immediate help. We followed the horse's tracks further, and a quarter mile later, we found the second boot. Same thing, standing upright, perfectly placed, no tracks around it except the horse's hoofprints circling it. The temperature was dropping, evening coming on fast in that way it does in the Alaskan wilderness where daylight just suddenly ends. We should have turned back, But then we saw something that made us keep going despite every survival instinct screaming at us to stop. Clothes, a jacket, then pants, then a shirt, all placed at intervals of 100 yards or so, each item laid out carefully in the snow like someone was marking a trail. And each piece of clothing was surrounded by the horse's tracks, like the animal had stopped at each one, circled it, then moved on. We found all the rider's clothes except underwear. At the last piece, a thermal undershirt, the horse's tracks stopped circling and headed straight away, moving fast, the spacing between prints showing it had been running. But there were no human tracks. None. Not a single footprint showing where the rider had walked. No signs of them removing their clothes. No indication anyone had been there at all except for the carefully placed garments and the horse's panicked flight. Jim radioed for backup while I searched the area. That is when I noticed something in the trees ahead, barely visible in the fading light. A shape, dark against the white snow, about 50 yards away. I called out, asking if they needed help, but got no response. I approached carefully, Jim right behind me, both of us with flashlights now as dusk settled into full darkness. The shape resolved into a person, or what was left of one. They were sitting with their back against a large spruce tree, completely naked, covered in snow, frozen solid. Their skin was blue-gray, eyes open, staring at nothing. But here is what made Jim vomit and made me question everything I thought I knew about how people die in the wilderness. The body had no visible injuries, no signs of hypothermia. Its final stages, no indication they tried to dig for warmth or build shelter. They were just sitting there, peaceful, almost like they decided to stop and rest and never got back up. And their hands were folded in their lap, placed carefully, deliberately, like someone had posed them after death. The medical examiner later identified the body as Marcus Chen, a 38-year-old accountant from Seattle who had been visiting Alaska alone. He rented the horse from an outfitter in Talkeetna 3 days before we found the animal. The outfitter said Marcus was an experienced rider, had grown up around horses, knew what he was doing. The autopsy showed Marcus died of exposure, but his internal body temperature suggested he had been dead for less than 6 hours when we found him, which meant he was still alive when his horse bolted, still alive and watching his own horse run away, leaving him to freeze. But the medical examiner couldn't explain the clothing arrangement, couldn't explain why there were no footprints, couldn't explain why Marcus would remove all his clothes in sub-freezing temperatures and then carefully place them in a line like breadcrumbs. There is a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. When people get severely hypothermic, sometimes in the final stages their body rebels and they feel incredibly hot, start removing clothes, making their situation worse. But that doesn't explain the careful placement. That doesn't explain the positioning of the body. That doesn't explain the lack of tracks. The state troopers closed the case as accidental death, exposure, simple tragedy. But I took that disposable camera, the one from the saddlebags, and had it developed privately. I never told anyone what I saw in those photos. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy, or worse, that they'd believe me. The first 20 pictures were normal. Marcus on the trail, scenic shots of mountains and forests, a few selfies showing him smiling, happy to be alive. But the last 3 pictures changed everything. Picture 22 showed the forest ahead, trees thick with snow, nothing unusual. Except if you looked carefully, really looked, there was something in the background. A figure, tall and dark, barely visible between the trees. It could have been a shadow, could have been nothing. But it had the shape of a person. Picture 23 showed the same view, but closer. The figure was more defined now, definitely person-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, proportions off, standing in a way that didn't look natural. Picture 24, the last one, was taken from ground level, like the camera had been dropped or Marcus had fallen. It showed the sky through the trees, and there in the frame, looking down at where the camera lay, was a face. I can describe it properly. It wasn't the human, but it wasn't the animal either. It was something in between, or maybe something that was trying to look human and couldn't quite get it right. The expression was curious, tilted to one side, like it was studying the camera, trying to understand what it was. And behind that face, barely visible in the background, was Marcus. Standing upright, perfectly still, hands at his sides, staring at nothing with completely blank eyes. I burned those photos, took them to my backyard fire pit and watched them curl and blacken in the flames. But I can still see that face when I close my eyes, can still see Marcus standing there like a puppet with cut strings. The horse recovered eventually, was adopted by a family in Palmer. But it never went on trails again, would refuse to enter forests, would panic at the sight of deep snow. The family said it would sometimes stand at the fence line at night, staring into the darkness, ears pinned back, muscles trembling. Like it was watching for something. Like it remembered what had happened to its rider and was terrified it would happen again. I left the state troopers 5 years ago, couldn't handle the wilderness anymore. The isolation. The things that might be watching from the trees. I live in Phoenix now, work security at a shopping mall, surrounded by people and concrete and artificial light. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about that clearing. I dream about Marcus sitting against that tree, hands folded peacefully, eyes open. And in my dreams, he is not alone. There are others with him, dozens of them, all sitting in a circle around that spruce tree, all naked and frozen and posed like dolls. All waiting for the next rider who wanders too far off the trail. Story 2. Reflective faces. Have you ever looked into a mirror and seen something looking back that wasn't quite you? I have. Except it wasn't a mirror. It was a face shield on a snowmobile helmet. And what I saw staring back at me that night on Highway 2 changed everything I thought I understood about what is real and what I said. This happened 3 months ago, but it started in 1994. I need you to understand that connection. Because without it, none of this makes sense. Without it, I'm just another guy who cracked under the pressure of an Alaskan winter. But I didn't crack. I discovered something that has been waiting along that frozen stretch of road for almost 30 years, something that was never really gone. I drive trucks for a living, long-haul routes through the northern states. December through February, I run supplies between Fairbanks and the smaller communities scattered along Highway 2. It's brutal work. 15-hour drives through whiteout conditions, temperatures that'll kill your engine if you stop moving for too long. But it pays well, and I've always handled isolation better than most people. At least, I thought I did. The first time I saw them was around midnight, about 40 miles outside of a nothing town called Coldfoot. Population 73 in summer, maybe half that in winter. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and strangers are remembered for years. I was hauling drilling equipment, making decent time despite the snow, when my headlights caught movement on the shoulder. 3 snowmobiles, lined up parallel to the highway, just sitting there with their engines running. I could see the exhaust clouds in my high beams, could hear the distinctive whine of their motors even through my cab walls. But it was the riders that made me ease off the gas. They were all facing me, helmets on, and their face shields caught my headlights like mirrors. Perfect reflections, not tinted, not dark, reflective, like someone had replaced the visors with polished chrome. I slowed down, not stopping but dropping to maybe 20 miles per hour. You don't stop on Highway 2 in winter unless you absolutely have to. As I passed them, all 3 turned their heads in unison, tracking my truck. The movement was too smooth, too synchronized, like they were one thing instead of 3. And in those reflective shields, I saw my truck pass by, saw myself behind the wheel, except the reflection showed my cab lights off. They were on. I was looking right at them, but the reflection showed darkness. I hit the gas and didn't look back. Told myself it was locals messing around, maybe drunk, maybe just bored. Highway 2 doesn't offer much entertainment, but the image stuck with me. Those perfect reflections, that synchronized movement, the way my own face looked in those shields, pale and distant, like I was seeing myself from very far away. When I reached Coldfoot an hour later, I stopped at the only gas station that stays open year-round. The attendant was a guy named Ray, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face you get from decades of Arctic wind. I mentioned the snowmobilers, asked if there was a club or group that rode at night. Ray's expression changed. Not scared exactly, but careful, guarded. He told me about 1994. About how for 3 months that winter, people in Coldfoot and the surrounding communities reported being harassed by snowmobilers. They'd show up at random times, always at night, always in groups of 3 or 4. They'd circle houses, idle in driveways, follow cars on the highway. But they never spoke, never removed their helmets, and their face shields were always reflective. Mirrors that showed you yourself, but wrong somehow. Off. The harassment escalated. They appear closer each time. More aggressive. One woman reported waking up to find them outside her bedroom window, just standing there in the snow, engines running, watching her through those chrome shields. A man driving home from work had them pace his truck for 20 miles, matching his speed exactly, never falling behind or pulling ahead. Police investigated. State troopers came up from Fairbanks. They found nothing. No tracks in the snow where witnesses claimed the snowmobiles had been. No disturbed powder, no exhaust residue, nothing. It was like the machines floated, like they weren't really there at all. Then it stopped. Middle of February, the reports just ended. No more sightings, no more harassment. Everyone assumed the riders had moved on or gotten bored, until they found Thomas Rake. Thomas was a mechanic, lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Coldfoot. Kept to himself mostly, did repair work on snow machines and ATVs. His neighbor noticed his lights had been on for 3 days straight and called it in. Police found Thomas in his shed, frozen solid, dead for at least a week. But it was what surrounded him that made the story local legend. Snowmobile gear, vintage equipment from the 70s and 80s. Helmets with reflective face shields, the old kind you can't even buy anymore. Suits, gloves, boots, all arranged in a circle around his body, like he'd been setting up some kind of display. None of the gear had ever been used. Tags still attached to some pieces, but it was covered in frost, like it had been sitting in a freezer for decades. The autopsy showed hypothermia, but Thomas's shed had a working heater. The temperature inside when they found him was 65 degrees. He defrozen to death in a warm room, surrounded by unused snowmobile equipment. Ray told me all this while pumping my diesel, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He said people don't talk about it anymore, said it was better to let old ghosts lie. But his eyes kept drifting to the highway, to the darkness beyond the station lights, like he was expecting something to emerge from the white. I thanked him, paid cash, and got back on the road. I had another 6 hours to my destination, and the story had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I kept my speed up, kept my eyes forward, and tried not to think about reflective shields and synchronized movements. They were waiting at mile marker 147, 5 of them this time, spread across both lanes, blocking the highway. I saw them from half a mile away, plenty of time to stop, but something in my gut screamed at me to keep going. I downshifted, built up speed, and laid on my horn. They didn't move, just sat there on their machines, helmets aimed at me, face shields catching my headlights and throwing them back. I was doing 50 when I reached them. My truck they obliterated those snowmobiles, they torn through them like paper. But at the last second, they weren't through there. Not gone, not moved, just not there. I drove through the space they deoccupied, felt nothing, heard nothing, and when I checked my mirrors, they were behind me, reforming, turning to watch me pass. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I grabbed my CB radio, tried to raise anyone on the trucker channels. Static, pure static. Then, underneath the white noise, I heard engines. Snowmobile engines, getting closer. They came up alongside my truck, matching my speed. 2 on my left, 3 on my right, riding in perfect formation. I could see them clearly in my side mirrors, see every detail of their vintage gear, their bulky suits and old helmets. And I could see their face shields, those perfect mirrors, and what they were showing me. My truck, empty. The driver, his seat vacant, like I wasn't there at all, like I already disappeared. That is when I understood. Thomas Rake hadn't been displaying that gear. He'd been trying to join them. He'd been trying to become one of them. And he succeeded, in a way. He defrozen, crossed over, become part of whatever the hell rides Highway 2 in the deep winter. The snowmobilers stayed with me for another 10 miles. I couldn't shake them, couldn't outrun them. They were part of the road now, part of the cold, and they were showing me my future. Showing me the empty truck, the absent driver, the space where I used to be. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they dropped back. I watched in my mirrors as they slowed, stopped, and turned around, heading back toward Coldfoot, back toward mile marker 147, back to wherever they wait when they were not riding, I finished my route, delivered my cargo, drove straight back to Fairbanks without stopping. I told my dispatcher I was done with the northern runs, took a pay cut to haul freight down to the lower 48. He didn't ask questions. Something in my face must have told him not to. But here is the thing that keeps me awake. Before I left that night, before they turned back, one of them pulled up right next to my window. Close enough that I could have reached out and touched the helmet. And in that reflective shield, I saw myself. Not the empty truck this time. Me. But I was different. Older. Frozen. And I was wearing a helmet with a reflective face shield, sitting on a snowmobile, riding alongside a truck on Highway 2. I am writing this from a motel in Montana, as far from Alaska as I could get while still working. But I am cold all the time now. The heater in my room is cranked to 80, and I'm wearing 3 layers, and I'm still cold. My fingers are stiff. My breath comes out in clouds even though I am indoors. And last night, I heard them. Snowmobile engines outside my window. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just closed my eyes and waited for the sound to fade. It didn't fade. It is still there, low and constant, like they re-idling. Waiting. I think Thomas Rake had the right idea. I think he understood what they wanted. They were not harassing people. They re-recruiting. They re-looking for riders to join their gang, their pack, their whatever the hell they are. And once they choose you, once they show you that empty reflection, you're already gone. You just don't know it yet. My hands are so cold I can barely type. There is frost forming on the inside of my window, even though it is 50 degrees outside. And when I look at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, sometimes I see it. Just for a second. A helmet, a face shield, chrome and perfect and reflective. I think I'm going back to Highway 2. I done. Didn't want to, but I done. Do you think I have a choice anymore? They recalling me back. The cold is calling me back. And maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe joining them is better than fighting it. Maybe Thomas figured that out in his shed, surrounded by gear he never used, gear that was waiting for him all along. If you drive Highway 2 in winter, and you see snowmobilers with reflective shields, don't stop. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't look at what they re-showing you. Because once you see yourself gone, once you see that empty space where you should be, you've already started freezing. You've already started joining the gang that I ascend to there. I'm so cold now. So cold my bones feel like ice. But at least I won to be riding alone. Story 3. Warm vein. The gold was 98 degrees when I pulled it from the rock. I know because I checked 3 times. Because at 40 below zero, nothing should feel like human skin against your bare hand. I should have left it buried. God, I should have walked away. My name is Tom Hendricks, and the reason 4 people are dead. Maybe more by now. I stopped checking the news 3 months ago because I can handle knowing how far it is spread. How many hands have touched what I found? How many people are sitting in warm houses right now, feeling the cold creep into their bones, and wondering why they can to stop shivering? It started last November in Hatcher Pass, about 50 miles north of Anchorage. I am a prospector, have been for 15 years. Not the romantic kind you see in movies. I drive a beat-up Ford, work claims that bigger operations passed over, and make just enough to keep the lights on. It's lonely work, but I prefer it that way. No bosses, no schedules, just me in the mountains and the possibility that the next rock I crack might change everything. That is what I was thinking when I found the warm vein. I've been working a played-out section of Independence Mine. One of those spots where amateurs come to pan and pretend they reliving history. Real miners abandoned it in the 40s. Too much work for too little yield. But I had a theory about a secondary deposit, a small pocket that might have been missed. So I spent 3 weeks in November cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground, chipping away at frozen granite, telling myself one more day, just one more day. Then my pick broke through into a cavity. The smell hit me first. Metallic and organic at the same time, like blood mixed with copper. I widened the hole with my hands, and that is when I saw it. Gold, a vein about as thick as my wrist, running back into the rock, gleaming in my headlamp. More gold than I'd seen in my entire career. Enough to pay off my truck, my cabin, maybe even buy something better. enough to change my life. I reached in to touch it, to make sure it was real, and that's when I felt the warmth. It radiated through my glove, pleasant and inviting, like holding a mug of coffee. I pulled my hand back fast, confused. I checked my thermometer, -42. The rock around the vein was so cold it burned to touch. But the gold itself felt alive with heat. I told myself it was a thermal vent, hot spring water running through the mountain, warming the metal. It happened sometimes, rare, but possible. I pulled off my glove and touched the gold with my bare hand, just to confirm what I was feeling. The warmth sank into my skin like liquid. Not surface heat, but something deeper. Something that spread up my arm and into my chest and made me realize how cold I'd been. How cold I'd always been, my whole life, without knowing it. The gold felt like coming home to a fire after years in the dark. Like being welcomed, like being wanted. I spent 4 hours extracting as much as I could carry, maybe 10 pounds, broken into chunks I could fit in my pack. The whole time, that warmth pulsed against my back, seeping through canvas and fleece and skin. By the time I hiked back to my truck, I wasn't cold anymore. I hadn't been cold since I touched the vein, and that should have been my first warning. I drove home with the pack on the passenger seat, glancing over every few minutes to make sure it was real. The gold seemed to glow in the dim light, not visibly, but in a way I felt more than saw. Like it was happy to be leaving the mountain. Like it had been waiting for someone to find it. My cabin is small, 1 room, wood stove, generator for power. It sits on 5 acres of nothing, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. Perfect for someone who wants to be alone. That night, I spread the gold out on my table and just stared at it. Even under harsh electric light, it was beautiful. Richer than normal gold, deeper in color, and still warm to the touch even hours after I brought it inside. I held a piece in my hand and felt that warmth spread through me again. Comforting, safe, the kind of warmth that makes you forget every bad thing that has ever happened. I sat there for hours, just holding it, feeling better than I had in years. I didn't notice the cold until morning. I woke on the couch, still dressed, the piece of gold clutched in my hand. The fire had gone out hours ago, and my breath was making clouds in the air. But I didn't feel cold. I felt perfect, room temperature, comfortable, like I was sitting in a warm bath. I checked the thermometer by the door. 53 degrees inside, cold enough that I should have been shivering, but I wasn't. The gold in my hand pulsed with that steady warmth, and somehow it was enough. Somehow it was keeping me comfortable in a room that should have been unbearable. I spent that day at the cabin, holding different pieces of gold, feeling that warmth move through me. I told myself I was authenticating it, checking purity, planning how to sell it. But really, I just didn't want to put it down. Every time I set a piece aside, I felt cold creep back in. Not the cold of the room, but something deeper. A cold that came from inside, like my body was remembering every frozen moment I ever experienced and trying to make me feel them all at once. The gold took that away. As long as I was touching it, I felt warm, protected, loved, almost, though that sounds crazy. I know how this sounds. I know what you... Rethinking, obsession, addiction. But you have to understand, it wasn't like that. Or maybe it was exactly like that, and I was too far gone to tell the difference. By day 3, I wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping more than an hour or 2 at a time. I just sat at the table, holding the gold, feeling that warmth, and wondering why I ever wanted anything else. The cabin was 45 degrees now. The generator had run out of fuel, and I couldn't remember the last time I defed the wood stove. But none of that mattered. I had the warmth. I had the gold. My neighbor, Phil, showed up on day 4. He knocked on the door, called my name, and when I didn't answer, he let himself in. I heard him swearing about the cold, saw him go to the wood stove and start building a fire. He asked if I was sick, if I needed help, why I was sitting in a freezing cabin holding rocks. I tried to explain, tried to tell him about the warmth, about how I finally found something that made the cold go away forever. But the words came out wrong, confused, and he looked at me like I lost my mind. Then he touched the gold. He set a piece on the table, and he picked it up, examining it, probably wondering if it was real. I watched his expression change, confusion turning to surprise, turning to something like relief. He held it longer, turning it over in his hands, and I saw the exact moment it took hold of him. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing slowed. He sat down across from me, still holding the gold, and smiled. We sat like that for hours, not talking, just holding our pieces of gold, feeling that perfect warmth, while the cabin got colder and colder around us. Phil froze to death sometime during the night. I woke at dawn to find him still sitting across from me, eyes open, ice crystals forming on his beard. The gold was still clutched in his rigid hand, and even in death, he looked peaceful. Happy, almost like he found exactly what he'd been searching for. I should have been horrified, should have called for help, tried to revive him. Something. But all I could think was that he looked warm, even frozen solid. With frost spreading across his skin, he looked warmer than I'd ever seen him. And the gold in his hand was still radiating that perfect heat. I took it from him. I had to pry his fingers loose, and they made small cracking sounds as they bent. But I got it free. 2 pieces now, 1 in each hand, double the warmth. I could feel my body temperature dropping, feel the cold that should have been killing me. But the gold kept it at bay, kept me comfortable while my cabin turned into a freezer. They found Phil a week later. His wife called the police when he didn't come home, and they tracked him to my place. They found his truck outside, found him at my table, found the cabin at 18 degrees. They didn't find me. I'd taken the gold and gone back to Hatcher Pass, back to the vein, because I knew there was more warmth waiting there. More gold that would keep the cold away forever. I am writing this from Independence Mine. I've been here for 2 months, living in the tunnel I dug, extracting more gold, feeling the warmth spread through me while the temperature outside drops to 50, 60 below. I hated weeks. Haven, you needed to. The gold provides everything. It's in my pockets, my pack, filling a duffel bag I use as a pillow. And it's not enough. It's never enough. Because here is what I finally understand. The cold ISNT outside. It's not the weather or the mountain or the Alaska winter. The cold is inside. It's always been inside, living in our bones, waiting. And the gold doesn't fight it. The gold feeds it. Every piece I touch, every hour I spend in that perfect warmth, the cold inside me grows deeper, colder, more permanent. I can feel it spreading. My core temperature is dropping. Has been dropping since the first time I touched that vein. But the gold makes me not care. Makes me feel warm even as my body slowly freezes from the inside out. Makes me think that dying of cold while feeling warm is the best way to go. The others came looking, a geologist, a reporter, someone from the mining company that used to own this claim. I showed them the vein, shared the warmth. They still here, somewhere in the tunnels, holding their pieces, feeling that perfect heat while their bodies turn to ice. And the worst part, I am leaving samples, pieces of the warm gold scattered around Anchorage, Palmer, Wasilla. Left at diners and gas stations and visitor centers, because the warmth wants to spread. And I want others to feel what I feel, that perfect, terrible comfort. That warmth that kills you slowly while making you grateful for every frozen second. If you find gold that feels warm to the touch, leave it where it is. Don't to pick it up. Don't to wonder why. Don't to convince yourself it is safe or special or yours. Because it's not gold anymore. I don't. You know what it is, but it's not gold. It's something that learned our shape, our warmth, and it's using it against us. Teaching us to trade our lives for comfort, our heat for its presence. I'm so cold now, so beautifully, perfectly cold. My body stopped shivering days ago. My fingers are black. My breath comes in short, painful gasps. But I am holding the gold, and I am warm, and that is all that matters. That is all that has ever mattered. They'll find me eventually, frozen like Phil, like the others, with this cursed gold clutched in my hands. And some idiot will pick it up, feel that warmth, and think they found treasure. They'll take it home, share it, spread it further, because that is what it wants. That is what it's always wanted, to teach us that warmth can be colder than ice, that comfort can kill you, that some things buried in mountains should stay buried forever. The gold is 98 degrees, body temperature, and now I understand why. It's remembering everyone who has held it, everyone who has fed it their heat, Everyone who has died feeling warm while freezing to death. Soon it will remember me too. Story 4. Frozen Trail. I found something in my grandfather, this attic, that proved 4 men never died the way history claims. My name is David Marsh, and I am a history teacher from Portland, Maine. Last November, I inherited my grandfather's house in Whitehorse, Yukon Territory. He was a retired archivist who spent 40 years collecting documents about northern Canada's mysteries. I thought I was just clearing out an old man. This obsession. I was wrong. The journal was hidden inside a false bottom in his desk drawer. Leather-bound, pages yellowed and brittle, dated February 1911. The handwriting was tight and controlled at first, then deteriorating into frantic scrawls. It belonged to Constable Francis Fitzgerald of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, leader of the Lost Patrol. You might know the story. 4 Mounties left Fort McPherson on December 21st, 1910, heading to Dawson City. A routine winter patrol covering 400 miles of frozen wilderness. They never arrived. Search parties found their bodies months later, scattered along the trail. The official verdict was death by starvation and exposure after losing their way in a blizzard. A tragic but understandable fate in the brutal Yukon winter. Except the journal tells a different story. A story that explains why my grandfather spent decades researching those deaths. A story that made me understand why some mysteries stay unsolved by design. The journal's first entry is mundane. Fitzgerald documenting supplies, weather conditions, the morale of his 3 companions, Constables George Kinney and Richard Taylor, and their guide Sam Carter. Standard procedure for a patrol that should have taken 30 days maximum. They had experience, proper equipment, enough provisions. Everything pointed to a successful journey. The tone changed on day 6. December 27, 1910. Fitzgerald wrote about finding tracks in the snow. Not animal tracks. Not human tracks either. Something in between. Bipedal but too large, stride too long, feet shaped wrong. The tracks appeared beside their trail, paralleling their path for miles before vanishing into a stand of black spruce. Carter insisted they were old tracks, distorted by melting and refreezing. But Fitzgerald noted the tracks were fresh, made within the hour, and the temperature had been steady at 30 below zero. Nothing was melting. They followed their standard route for 3 more days. Then, on December 30th, Fitzgerald recorded something that made my hands shake when I read it. They found a camp. Not an old camp, not an abandoned camp, a camp that should not exist. 6 canvas tents arranged in a perfect circle around a dead fire. Equipment stacked with military precision. Sleds with runners that showed no wear. And footprints everywhere, the same wrong tracks from days before. Hundreds of them, all circling the camp in an endless loop. But no people, no signs of life, just the tracks in the tents and a silence that Fitzgerald described as oppressive, as if the air itself was waiting. Carter wanted to turn back. Fitzgerald overruled him. They were Mounties. Their duty was to investigate. They approached the camp cautiously. Kinney checked the tents. Empty. Not just unoccupied, but completely empty. No bedrolls, no supplies, no personal effects. Just bare canvas and packed snow floors. Taylor found something in the center of the camp. A stone cairn, 3 feet tall, stones stacked with inhuman precision. On top of the cairn was a skull. Not human, not any animal Fitzgerald recognized. Too large, jaw structure wrong. Eye sockets positioned at an angle that suggested forward-facing vision like a predator. Carter identified it immediately. Fitzgerald wrote down his exact words, even though he claimed not to believe them. The guide said it was a marker, a warning. The old people, the Gwitch, who had lived in this territory for thousands of years, they knew about the beings who walked the winter darkness. They called them the Nakani, the Watchers, the ones who mimic human form but are not human, the ones who appear during the longest nights and lead travelers astray. Fitzgerald dismissed it as superstition. He ordered the camp investigated thoroughly. They spent 2 hours searching, found nothing, but when they returned to their own sleds to continue the journey, they discovered something impossible. Their supplies were rearranged, not stolen, not damaged, just moved. Food canisters stacked in different order. Equipment placed on wrong sleds. Small changes, deliberate changes. Changes that meant something had been through their camp while they were investigating the empty tents barely 200 yards away. And none of them had heard a sound. They continued north. They had no choice. Turning back meant admitting fear of shadows and stories. But Fitzgerald, his entries grew shorter, more terse. He noted strange things. The dogs behaving oddly. refusing to pull, whining at empty air. The landscape looking familiar even though they had never traveled this exact route before. The sun seeming wrong, rising at angles that did not match his compass readings. On January 5th, 1911, they realized they were lost. Not lost in the traditional sense. They had maps, they had a compass, they had landmarks, but nothing matched. The mountains were in wrong positions. Rivers flowed in directions that contradicted their charts. Carter insisted they had somehow crossed into territory that was not on any map. Territory that existed between the known places. Fitzgerald tried to backtrack. They followed their own trail in the snow. But after 3 hours of retracing their path, they found themselves back at the stone cairn. The same skull on top. Except now there were more skulls. Dozens of them, arranged in a spiral pattern around the original marker. All the same wrong anatomy. All facing the same direction. North, the direction they needed to go. They made camp. Fitzgerald posted watches. He stayed up most of the night, documenting everything, trying to find rational explanations. He noted that Taylor had developed frostbite on his hands despite wearing proper gloves. That Kinney had stopped speaking except to answer direct questions. That Carter sat apart from the others, staring at the tree line, occasionally making gestures that looked like warning signs. The next entry was dated January 8th, 3 days missing from the journal. Fitzgerald offered no explanation for the gap. He simply wrote that they had lost time. That days passed without memory. That they woke on the 8th with no recollection of the 5th, 6th, or 7th. Their supplies showed 3 days of consumption. The dogs showed 3 days of travel exhaustion. But none of them remembered. And their sleds had moved 40 miles north, deeper into the wilderness, farther from any known settlement. That night, they saw them. Fitzgerald described figures at the edge of their firelight. Humanoid but too tall. Moving with a gait that was almost but not quite right. Standing absolutely still for minutes at a time. Then suddenly appearing yards away without seeming to walk the distance between. He counted 7 distinct figures. They formed a perimeter around the camp, always staying just beyond clear view, always watching. Taylor panicked. He grabbed his rifle and fired at one of the figures. The shot echoed across the frozen landscape. The figure did not react, did not fall, did not run. It simply turned its head. That slow, deliberate movement, and looked directly at Taylor. Fitzgerald wrote that he would never forget Taylor, his face in that moment. The way color drained from his skin. The way his eyes went wide with recognition of something fundamental and terrible. Taylor lowered the rifle. He walked to his tent. He did not speak again. Not that night. Not ever again, according to the journal, his later entries. The figures remained until dawn. Then they were gone. Not retreating, not fading into distance, just absent, as if they had never been there, except for the tracks. The wrong tracks, hundreds of them, circling the camp, coming within feet of the tents, close enough to touch the canvas, close enough to reach inside. They tried to continue south, back toward Fort McPherson, back toward safety. But the landscape refused to cooperate. Every direction they traveled led north. They would set out heading south by compass, travel for hours, then realize they were farther north than when they started. The sun moved wrong. Stars appeared in daylight. Shadows fell at impossible angles. Fitzgerald's entries became harder to read. His handwriting deteriorated. He wrote about hunger, about cold that went beyond physical sensation into something spiritual. He wrote about Carter disappearing during a rest stop. One moment the guide was there, checking the dogs. The next moment he was gone. No tracks leading away. No signs of struggle. Just absence. They searched for hours. Found nothing, except on a tree 300 yards from where Carter vanished, someone had carved a message. Fresh carved. The wood still bleeding sap despite the cold. It read, "They take US one by one." Carter, his handwriting. Carter, knife, still embedded in the tree trunk. But Carter was gone. Kinney broke on January 15th. Fitzgerald found him trying to eat his own boots, gnawing on frozen leather, tears streaming down his face. Kinney looked at Fitzgerald with eyes that held no recognition. No sanity. He kept repeating something that was not quite words. Sounds that approximated language but meant nothing. Or meant something Fitzgerald could not understand. By January 20th, it was just Fitzgerald and Taylor. The dogs were dead. The supplies were gone. They were walking south by compass but always ending up north. The figures appeared every night, closer each time, more distinct. Fitzgerald could see details now. The way their joints bent wrong. The way their faces held features that almost formed human expressions but failed in subtle, disturbing ways. The way they moved in perfect synchronization, like parts of a single organism. Taylor died on January 23rd. Fitzgerald woke to find him frozen solid outside the tent, standing upright in the snow, eyes open, staring north, frozen in mid-step, as if he had walked out in the night and simply stopped. Simply became ice. But here's what made me drop the journal when I first read it. What made me understand why my grandfather kept this hidden? What made me realize the official story was a lie? Taylor's body was found in March 1911, near the Peel River, 60 miles south of where Fitzgerald's journal placed his death. And Taylor was not frozen standing up. He was curled in a tent, hands wrapped around an empty rifle, expression peaceful, death by starvation and exposure. The journal continued for 3 more days after Taylor's death. Fitzgerald writing an increasingly erratic script. He described walking for days without stopping. No food, no water, just walking. The landscape had stopped pretending. The trees were wrong species for the region. The sky held colors that did not exist in nature. The figures walked with him now, on both sides, hurting him. He wrote that he finally understood. This was not their territory. This was not any territory. This was a space between spaces. A fold in reality where the rules stopped applying. The Nakani were not creatures. They were the guardians of these folds. Or maybe they were the folds themselves, wearing shapes that human minds could almost comprehend. The last entry was dated January 27, 1911. Fitzgerald wrote that he could see lights ahead. Lights that looked like Fort McPherson. Lights that promised warmth and safety and rescue. But he knew they were not real. He knew that walking toward those lights meant walking deeper into the fold. Farther from the world he knew. He wrote that he was going to walk toward them anyway. Because staying still meant freezing. And freezing meant becoming part of this place forever. At least if he walked, if he followed the lights, maybe he would find a way through. Maybe on the other side of the fold was another exit. Another door back to reality. The journal ended there, but Fitzgerald's body was found in February, near the Blackstone River. 70 miles from where his journal ended. He was lying peacefully, hands folded, expression calm. Death by exposure. My grandfather had spent years comparing the journal to the official reports. The bodies were found spread over a 100-mile radius, each in a different location, each showing death by natural causes given the circumstances. But the journal placed them all dying in the same general area. Within 20 miles of each other, all north of where their bodies were actually recovered. Someone moved the bodies, or something did, arranged them to tell a story of men who got lost, ran out of food, and died the way any lost patrol might die. A tragedy, but a comprehensible one. Not 4 men who walked into a fold in reality and never walked out. I hired a private investigator to research the official search party. What I learned kept me awake for weeks. The search party that found the bodies included a Gwitch-in tracker named John Moses. He reported finding the bodies but refused to discuss details, citing respect for the dead. He quit the force shortly after and moved south, never returning to the Yukon. He told his family before he died that some trails should never be followed. That some places exist where the world grows thin. That the Nakani still walk the winter darkness, still create their folds, still take those who wander too far into the cold. I also found weather records from January 1911. Strange patterns, temperature fluctuations that made no meteorological sense. Compass readings from as far south as Dawson City showing deviations of up to 40 degrees. Reports of the northern lights behaving abnormally, forming shapes that witnesses described as geometric and deliberate. All of it scrubbed from official records within a year. All of it buried under mundane explanations. Bad weather, navigation errors, tragic but ordinary deaths. Last month, I flew to Whitehorse. I hired a guide and traveled to the coordinates Fitzgerald had recorded in his journal. The place where Taylor died, where he became ice. We found nothing, just wilderness, just snow and trees and frozen silence. But on our second night camping, I saw tracks. Large, bipedal. Wrong. They circled our camp. The guide, a Gwitch-in man in his 60s, saw them too. He packed our gear immediately. He refused to discuss them. He just repeated one phrase over and over. The Nakani walked the fold. We left at dawn. On our way out, I found a stone cairn. Old, weathered, almost invisible under decades of snow. On top was a skull. Wrong anatomy, wrong proportions, exactly as Fitzgerald had described. I brought a camera. I took photographs. When I developed them, every image showed only static. Gray static with shapes almost visible within it. shapes that might have been tall figures, or might have been nothing. The journal is gone now. It vanished from my grandfather's house 3 days after I returned. No break-in, no theft, just gone, along with all my photographs. All my notes, everything except my memory. I am telling this story because someone needs to know. Because the Lost Patrol did not die from getting lost. They died from finding something. From walking into a place that should not exist. From meeting the things that guard the folds. And because those folds are still there. Still waiting. Still taking people during the long northern winters when the darkness lasts for months and the cold goes beyond physical into something else. The official story will never change. 4 Mounties lost their way and died. Simple, tragic, complete. But I know the truth. And now you do too. The Lost Patrol found the fold. The fold kept them. And something wore their bodies home. Arranged them carefully. Told a story that would satisfy the living and hide the truth. The Nakani still walk. The fold's still open. And some trails, once followed, lead to places we were never meant to go. Story 5. Soldier who never left his post. The handprint on the frozen window was fresh, and it was reaching toward me from the inside. I am a military historian, spent 15 years documenting abandoned fortifications across the United States. I've been in dozens of derelict bunkers, crumbling batteries, forgotten outposts. I've never believed in ghosts. Never felt anything supernatural in all those empty places. But Fort Randall in Cold Bay, Alaska changed that. It changed everything I thought I understood about what happens to men who die alone in places the world has forgotten. Cold Bay sits at the end of the Aleutian chain, closer to Russia than to Anchorage, a place where the wind never stops and the fog rolls in like a living thing. During World War II, the military built Fort Randall there as a coastal defense installation, housing hundreds of soldiers in concrete bunkers and gun emplacements, watching for Japanese invasion that never came. The fort was decommissioned in 1950, abandoned to the elements, slowly deteriorating under the assault of salt spray and Arctic weather. The few hundred people who live in Cold Bay now avoid the old fort. They say it's dangerous, unstable, that the tunnels could collapse. But the locals also say other things in quiet voices over drinks at the only bar in town. They say you can hear voices in the fog. They say soldiers still walk the perimeter at night. They say some men never really left their posts. I arrived in October, planning to spend 3 days documenting the fort before the winter storms made access impossible. The town is only taxi driver, an older woman named Margaret, refused to take me all the way to the fort. She dropped me at the access road, 2 miles out, and told me I had until 4 p.m. to finish. After that, she said, I was on my own until morning. When I asked why, she just looked at me with these serious eyes and said the fort belonged to the dead after dark, and the living weren't too welcome. The walk to Fort Randall took 40 minutes through knee-high grass and wind that cut through my jacket like it wasn't to there. The fort appeared gradually through the fog, a sprawling complex of concrete structures slowly being reclaimed by the tundra. Gun emplacements pointed at empty ocean. Barracks buildings sagged under collapsed roofs. And at the center, the main bunker complex. 3 stories of reinforced concrete buried into the hillside, dark windows like empty eye sockets staring at nothing. I started with the exterior structures, photographing the decay, taking notes on construction methods and defensive positions. Everything was standard, exactly what I expected to find. But I kept noticing something odd. Small things, easily dismissed individually but adding up to something unsettling. Fresh boot prints in the mud near doorways, despite no one living here for 70 years. Cigarette butts that hadn't been fully degraded, like they'd been smoked recently. And in one of the barracks, a coffee cup sitting on a window ledge, half full of liquid that was still wet. I checked my watch. 2 p.m, plenty of time to explore the main bunker before Margaret returned. The entrance was a massive steel door, rusted but still on its hinges, hanging open like a mouth. Inside, concrete stairs descended into darkness, the smell of mold and salt and something else, something organic and wrong, rising from below. My flashlight barely penetrated the gloom. The stairs led to a central corridor, doors branching off on both sides, everything coated in a layer of ice despite it being October. The temperature inside was at least 20 degrees colder than outside, my breath fogging in thick clouds, frost forming on the walls in intricate patterns. I moved through the bunker methodically, documenting each room. Officers' quarters, enlisted barracks, a mess hall with tables still bolted to the floor, a radio room with equipment long since stripped of anything valuable. Everything was frozen in time, abandoned mid-use, like the garrison had simply vanished one day. In the command center, I found a duty roster still posted on the wall, dated February 1949, listing names and assignments. Someone had scratched through one name with something sharp, gouging deep lines in the paper. Next to it, written in what looked like dried blood, were 3 words, "Still on duty." That should have been my signal to leave. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was profoundly wrong with this place. But I, stubborn, convinced myself it was just vandals or local kids trying to scare people. I pressed deeper into the bunker, following a side corridor toward the ammunition storage areas. That's where I found the first body. Not a skeleton, not ancient remains. A body, frozen solid, wearing a World War II era Army uniform, sitting against the wall with a rifle across its lap. The preservation was perfect, the cold having mummified the corpse, skin like leather stretched over bone, eyes still intact and staring straight ahead. I checked the name tape on the uniform. Williams. I pulled out the duty roster photo I'd taken. Private First Class Robert Williams was listed on it, one of the garrison's final assignments. My hands were shaking as I backed away from the body, mind racing to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe someone had brought it here, staged it as some kind of sick joke. But who would do that? And how would they get a 70-year-old uniform and perfectly preserved corpse? I turned to head back toward the exit, and that is when my flashlight caught the handprint on the frost-covered window. The window looked into another corridor, deeper into the bunker complex. The print was fresh, moisture still beaded around the edges, fingers clearly defined. And it was on the inside of the glass. Someone was in here with me. I called out, my voice echoing through the concrete chambers, asking if anyone was there. The echo of my own voice came back distorted, wrong somehow, like the bunker was changing the sound as it traveled. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, boots on concrete, coming from somewhere deeper in the complex. I ran, pure panic. No thought, just an overwhelming need to get out of that frozen tomb. I raced back the way I'd come, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off walls, illuminating doorways that seemed to multiply, corridors that I didn't remember passing through before. Behind me, the footsteps continued, keeping pace, never speeding up or slowing down, just maintaining that steady march like a soldier on patrol. And then I heard voices, multiple men talking quietly, the words indistinct but the tone conversational, casual, like guards changing shifts or buddies sharing a smoke break. But the voices were coming from rooms I'd already checked, rooms that had been empty minutes before. I burst through a doorway and found myself in the mess hall again, except now it wasn't empty. There were men sitting at the tables, dozens of them, all in World War II uniforms, all frozen solid like statues, frost coating their faces and hands. They were positioned like they'd been eating, talking, living their normal routines. But their eyes were open, all of them, tracking me as I stumbled backward, following my movement with slow, deliberate precision. My flashlight died, just clicked off, plunging me into absolute darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using its screen glow to navigate, and that's when I saw him. A soldier standing in the doorway I'd just come through, blocking my escape. He was different from the others, not frozen, moving with fluid grace, head tilted as he watched me. His uniform was pristine, pressed and proper, boots shined to a mirror gloss. But his face was wrong, skin too pale, lips blue with cold, eyes reflecting my phone, this light like an animal. He raised a hand and pointed at me, then at the walls around us. The gesture was clear. You're not leaving. You're staying. This is your post now. I ran for another exit, any exit, smashing through a door that led to a service tunnel. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, ceiling dripping with ice, walls pressing close. I could hear them behind me now, not just footsteps but dozens of them, marching in perfect formation, their boots creating a rhythm that echoed off the concrete like a heartbeat. The tunnel branched, and I took the right path without thinking, desperate to put distance between me and whatever was pursuing. I ran for what felt like forever, my lungs burning in the frozen air, legs cramping, until I burst through a door and found myself outside. But I wasn't at the entrance. I was on the far side of the complex, near the coastal gun emplacements, the ocean crashing against rocks below. The fog had rolled in completely now, visibility down to maybe 10 feet, the world reduced to gray nothing. My phone showed 5:47 p.m. I'd been in the bunker for over 3 hours, though it had felt like maybe 30 minutes. I'd missed my ride. Margaret was long gone, and I was alone with the fort until morning. I could see lights in the bunker windows now, flickering and weak like candles or old electric bulbs. Shadows moved past them, human shapes, conducting their routines in the abandoned structure. I heard a bell ringing, the kind they used to signal shift changes or meal times. The fort was alive, functioning, existing in some pocket of time that shouldn't be possible. I found a small maintenance shed near the perimeter and locked myself inside, wedging my backpack against the door. The shed had a tiny window, and through it I could watch the fort. All night, I watched as the lights moved from room to room, following a pattern, a schedule. The soldiers were maintaining their routines, standing their posts, living their garrison life in an endless loop. At midnight, I saw them outside, 20 or 30 men in formation, marching the perimeter, conducting their patrols. They moved through the fog like ghosts, but their footsteps were real, crunching on frozen ground, and their voices carried in the wind. They were calling names, conducting roll call, checking that everyone was present and accounted for. One of them broke from formation and walked toward my shed. He stopped outside the window, and in the moonlight I could see his face clearly. The pale soldier from the mess hall, the one who pointed at me. He stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just watching me through the glass, expression completely neutral. Then he smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen because it wasn't malicious or cruel. It was welcoming, friendly, like he was greeting a new recruit, someone joining the unit. He raised his hand and gestured toward the fort, inviting me to join them, to take my place in their eternal garrison. I stayed in that shed until dawn, watching the soldiers continue their routines. As the sun rose, they faded, becoming translucent, then vanishing completely as daylight touched them. By the time Margaret arrived at 7 a.m., the fort was empty again, just a decaying ruin with no signs of life. I told her I spent the night in town, lied about finishing early. She looked at me with knowing eyes but didn't push. When we passed a bar on the way to the airport, I saw a memorial plaque on the wall. It listed names of soldiers who served at Fort Randall, and at the bottom, in smaller text, a note. During the winter of 1949, 15 men stationed at Fort Randall developed severe psychological symptoms due to isolation and extreme weather. By spring, most had recovered, but 3 soldiers disappeared into the facility and were never found. Private Robert Williams was one of the missing. I researched the fort after I left, found medical records and incident reports. The isolation had driven some men mad, the endless dark and cold and wind breaking their minds. Some had refused to leave when decommission orders came, insisting their duty wasn't finished, that they had to maintain the post. The army had sealed sections of the bunker rather than drag them out. Just locked doors and left them there, alone in the dark, to live out whatever was left of their broken lives in the concrete tomb they refused to abandon. I think they were still there, still standing their posts, still believing the war continues and they were the last line of defense. And I think they were lonely, desperate for new recruits, for someone to share their eternal watch. My camera and notes from Fort Randall are in a safe deposit box, and I would never publish them. I tell people the trip was a bust, that I couldn't access the structure, because if I publish what I found, someone else will go there. Someone else will spend the night in that bunker, and eventually, someone want to come back out. They'll join the garrison, take their post, march the perimeter in the fog with the others who never left. Still on duty. Story 6. He wanted to become the bear. The skull was still dripping when I found it nailed to the cabin door, and the claw marks on the wood were too deliberate to be from any animal. My name is Jake Morrison, and in 1996 I was a wildlife officer stationed on Kodiak Island, Alaska. I'd taken the job for the scenery and solitude, thinking I'd spend my days tracking bear populations and keeping hunters in line. Instead, I spent 3 months hunting a man who convinced himself he could transform into something inhuman. And in the process, I learned that some obsessions don't just drive you crazy. They drive you into becoming something worse than death. It started with missing hikers. 3 people over 2 months, all experienced outdoorsmen who knew the island, all vanishing without a trace in areas thick with Kodiak bears. The assumption was simple. Bear attacks, bodies dragged off and consumed. Tragic but not unusual. Kodiak bears are the largest land predators on Earth, 1,200 pounds of muscle and teeth, and they rule this island absolutely. But the locals knew something was wrong. The Alutiiq people, indigenous to Kodiak, started talking about someone who had broken the old laws, someone who tried to take the bear, his power for himself. They wouldn't give me details, just shook their heads and said I should talk to Thomas Werner. Werner lived 30 miles from town in a cabin accessible only by boat or float plane. He moved to Kodiak 5 years earlier from Washington State, bought property in the remote interior, and slowly cut himself off from human contact. His neighbors said he was obsessed with bears, spent all his time watching them, photographing them, studying their behavior. Some said he'd gotten too close, that the line between observer and obsessed had blurred completely. I flew out on a gray November morning, the kind where clouds press down so low you feel like the sky is falling. Werner's cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by dense spruce forest, and even from the air, I could see something was wrong. The clearing was ringed with objects hung from trees, dozens of them, swaying in the wind. When I landed and got closer, I realized what they were. Animal bones, bear skulls and ribs and long bones, all tied with leather cord and arranged in patterns that looked almost ceremonial. And in the center of the clearing, someone had built a massive structure from logs and stones, shaped like a bear standing on its hind legs, easily 15 feet tall. The cabin door was covered in scratch marks, deep gouges that went through the wood in some places. And nailed at eye level was a fresh bear skull, still wet with tissue, jaw hanging open like it was screaming. The smell of decay was overwhelming. I called out, identifying myself as wildlife enforcement, but got no response. The cabin door was unlocked, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, the place looked like a combination of research station and shrine. Every wall was covered in photos of bears, hundreds of them, some taken at incredible proximity that should have been impossible without getting killed. Maps of the island marked with locations and dates, tracking movements and territories. But it was the journal that made my blood run cold. Werner had been documenting his transformation. That is the only way to describe it. Entries spanning 5 years, starting with clinical observations of bear behavior and gradually descending into something unhinged. He wrote about ancient Alutiiq beliefs, about shamans who could take animal form, about rituals that could transfer the spirit of a killed bear into a human host. The later entries were barely legible, written in shaky handwriting that suggested either illness or madness. He described eating raw meat, sleeping in caves, walking on all fours until his hands bled. He wrote about feeling his bones changing, his teeth growing, his mind merging with something primal and hungry. And he wrote about the 3 hikers. Not by name, just called them offerings. He hunted them like a bear would, stalked them for days, waited until they were isolated and vulnerable. Then he killed them with his bare hands, teeth, whatever he could use to mimic a bear attack. The journal described their final moments in detail that made me physically sick. The last entry was dated 2 days before I arrived. It said the transformation was almost complete, that he could feel the bear inside him fully now, that he just needed one more offering to finish the ritual. One more kill to permanently become what he'd been studying. I radioed for backup immediately, but the weather was deteriorating fast, visibility dropping to 0. I was told to secure the cabin and wait, that they'd send a team at first light. But I couldn't just sit there, not knowing Werner was out there somewhere, hunting. I found his trail behind the cabin, fresh boot prints heading into the forest toward a river valley bears frequented during salmon runs. I followed, my service weapon drawn, moving as quietly as I could through underbrush that seemed to grab at my clothes. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing but the sound of wind through trees and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I'd been in plenty of dangerous situations tracking bears, but this felt different. This felt like being hunted. I found the first body a mile from the cabin, or what was left of it, The scene was staged to look like a bear mauling, but I could see the inconsistencies. Wounds were too clean, too purposeful. Bones broken in ways that suggested human hands, not animal jaws. And arranged around the corpse were stones placed in a circle, each one painted with crude symbols. The other 2 bodies were nearby, displayed in similar fashion. Werner had kept them, preserved them somehow in the cold, brought them to this place to complete whatever twisted ceremony he believed would transform him. I heard movement in the trees behind me, branches cracking under significant weight. I spun around, weapon raised, and saw him. Thomas Werner stood 50 feet away, naked except for a bearskin draped over his shoulders, face painted with what looked like blood. He was a big man, maybe 6'3" and 240 pounds. But he lost weight, ribs showing, muscles corded and tense. His eyes were what got me though. They were wrong. Pupils too wide, reflecting light like an animal that's filled with something that wasn't quite human anymore. He dropped to all fours, and I swear to God, the way he moved was wrong. His joints bent at angles that shouldn't have been possible. His hands and feet finding purchase on the ground like he'd been walking that way for years. And the sound he made, it wasn't human speech or animal growl. It was something in between. A vocalization that made every hair on my body stand up. I ordered him to stop, to get on the ground, but he didn't react to my words. He just started moving toward me, slow and deliberate, circling like a predator sizing up prey. His mouth hung open, and I could see he defiled his teeth into points, blood crusted around his gums. I fired a warning shot into the air. He didn't even flinch, just kept coming, that horrible crawl, getting closer, moving between trees with an ease that seemed impossible for a human body. I fired again, aiming for his leg, trying to stop him without killing him. The bullet hit. I saw the impact, saw blood spray. But he barely slowed, just adjusted his movement and kept coming, now making this huffing sound that bears make when they about to charge. That's when the real bear showed up. It came from my left. A massive male Kodiak, easily 1,000 pounds, drawn by the gunshots or the smell of blood or maybe something else. It stopped when it saw Werner, rose up on its hind legs to its full height, easily 9 feet tall, and made a sound I'd never heard a bear make before. Not aggression, not fear, something else. Recognition maybe, or confusion, like it was seeing something that shouldn't exist. Werner turned to face it, rose up on his own legs to match its posture, and screamed. The sound was inhuman. A roar that came from somewhere deep and primal, challenge and rage mixed together. And the bear, this apex predator that feared nothing on the island, backed away. It actually retreated, dropping to all fours and moving backward, keeping its eyes on Werner until it could turn and disappear into the forest. The bear ran from him. I used that moment to run myself, crashing through the underbrush back toward the cabin, my rational mind completely offline, operating on pure survival instinct. Behind me I could hear Werner following, that awful crawling movement, gaining on me despite my terror-fueled sprint. I made it to the clearing just as a helicopter broke through the clouds, backup finally arriving. I waved frantically, and they touched down, 2 troopers jumping out with rifles. I screamed at them that Werner was behind me, that he was dangerous, that they needed to be ready. Werner burst from the tree line, and both troopers opened fire. Multiple hits, center mass, shots that should have dropped him instantly. But he kept coming, kept moving, until one final shot caught him in the head and he finally went down, collapsing 20 feet from the helicopter. The medical examiner's report listed cause of death as gunshot wounds, manner as justifiable homicide. But the autopsy revealed things that never made it into official reports. Werner's bone structure had changed, joints showing signs of deliberate damage and reformation, like he'd been breaking and resetting them to achieve different range of motion. His teeth were filed, his jaw muscles overdeveloped from years of using them like weapons. And his stomach contents included raw meat, bone fragments, and human tissue. The 3 hikers' bodies were recovered and returned to their families. Werner's cabin was burned, all his research destroyed. The official story was that a deranged hermit had killed 3 people in psychotic episodes before being stopped by law enforcement. But the Alutiiq elders I spoke with afterward told me something different. They said Werner had succeeded, at least partially, that he'd taken enough of the bear as spirit to become something in between, neither fully human nor fully animal. They said that kind of transformation had been attempted before, centuries ago, and it always ended in death and madness. They performed ceremonies at the site, cleansing rituals to make sure nothing of what Werner had become remained in the land. I left Kodiak Island 6 months later. Couldn't he handle the isolation anymore? Couldn't he go into the forest without feeling watched? I work in Anchorage now, urban environment, surrounded by people and lights and civilization. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Werner, about how he looked moving through that forest, about the bear that ran from him, about those eyes that held something that wasn't human anymore. And I wonder if transformation is really possible, if obsession and belief in madness can actually change what you are at a fundamental level. I wonder if some part of him is still out there, still hunting, still trying to complete whatever dark ritual he started. Because they never found his heart. The autopsy noted it was missing, cut from his chest post-mortem, taken by person or persons unknown. The Alutiiq say the heart is where the spirit lives, where the transformation truly happens. And if someone has Werner's heart, if someone kept it for their own purposes, then maybe his obsession didn't to die with him. Maybe it's still out there, waiting for the next person desperate enough or crazy enough to try what he tried. To become the bear. Story 7. They started whispering my name. The security footage showed me standing perfectly still in front of the display case for 17 minutes. But I have no memory of those 17 minutes at all. I am a night security guard at the Anchorage Museum, have been for 8 years. It's an easy job, mostly. Walk the floors, check the locks, make sure no pipes burst in winter. The museum houses everything from contemporary art to natural history exhibits, but the crown jewel of the collection is on the 3rd floor, the Native Heritage Hall. And in that hall, behind thick glass in a climate-controlled case, are 2 mummies. The Regent Iñupiat remains, a woman and child, discovered in 1994 during construction near Barrow. Preserved by permafrost for over 500 years, their skin is dark leather, bodies frozen in positions that suggest they died together, the woman curled protectively around the child. The museum displays them with reverence, surrounded by artifacts from their culture, educational placards explaining their significance. But everyone who works night shift has stories about them, tools that move between rounds, lights that flicker only in that room, and the whispers, soft voices speaking in a language none of us understand, words that seem to come from the display case itself. I heard the stories when I started, dismissed them as new guy hazing, veteran guards trying to spook the rookie. In 8 years, I never experienced anything unusual. The museum at night was just empty and quiet, exactly what you'd expect. Until 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday, middle of March, still dark at 9 p.m. when my shift started. I did my first round at 10, walked through all 3 floors, checked every room. Everything normal. The mummies were where they always were, positioned in their eternal embrace. The soft LED lighting making their preserved features look almost peaceful. I returned to the security office, poured coffee, settled in to watch cameras and catch up on paperwork. The museum has 32 cameras covering every major gallery and hallway. I can see almost the entire building from my desk. At 11:47, motion sensors triggered on the 3rd floor. Camera 12, the Native Heritage Hall. I pulled up the feed, expecting to see a rat or maybe air currents from the HVAC setting off the sensors. The display case was open. Not broken, not shattered. Just open. The glass panel that required 2 keys and a security code somehow standing wide, the mummies exposed to room air for the first time in decades. My first thought was system malfunction, some kind of automatic maintenance cycle I didn't know about. But the museum would never open those cases at night, never risk the specimens. I radioed the overnight supervisor, Mike, who was doing rounds on the 1st floor. Told him we had a situation, possible security breach on 3. He said he could meet me there in 2 minutes. I took the stairs up, my flashlight cutting through the darkness of the closed museum. The 3rd floor was colder than it should have been, my breath visible in the air despite the heating system running. The Native Heritage Hall stretched before me, displays of kayaks and hunting tools and ceremonial masks creating strange shadows in my flashlight beam. The display case was definitely open. I could see it from the doorway, the glass panel standing at a 45-degree angle, the climate control system screaming alarms that should have been deafening but somehow weren't making any sound at all. And the mummies had moved. Not much, just enough to notice if you'd seen them every night for 8 years. The woman's arm, which had been curled around the child, was now extended slightly, reaching, and her head had turned just a few degrees, enough that her preserved face was now pointed toward the entrance instead of down at the child. Pointed at me. Mike arrived, out of breath from the stairs, took one look at the case and immediately called the director. Museum policy for any disturbance to the collection was clear. Secure the area. Done. To touch anything. Wait for senior staff. We stood there in the hallway, watching the case, waiting. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so soft I almost missed it under the sound of Mike's radio chatter. Words in a language I didn't recognize. Syllables that felt old, ancient, like they'd been spoken by people who'd been dead for centuries. Mike heard it too. I could tell by the way he went still, head tilted, listening. The whispers grew slightly louder, still unintelligible but definitely coming from the display case. Multiple voices, overlapping, urgent somehow, like they were trying to tell us something important. Mike backed toward the stairs, said we should wait downstairs until the director arrived. But I couldn't move. The whispers had changed, shifted into something that sounded almost like English, individual words emerging from the ancient language. Cold, dark, alone, help. The woman's preserved face seemed to be staring directly at me now. Her leather skin pulled tight over bone, eye sockets dark and endless. Mike grabbed my arm, physically pulled me away from the hall, and we retreated to the first floor. The director arrived 20 minutes later with a conservator and a tribal liaison from the local Inupiat community. They went upstairs while Mike and I waited in the lobby, not talking, both of us shaking in ways we couldn't quite articulate. The director came down an hour later. The case had been secure the entire time, she said. No signs of tampering, locks engaged, glass panel sealed. The security footage showed nothing unusual, just the case sitting undisturbed all night. And the mummies were positioned exactly as they'd always been, unchanged. Mike and I were told we'd experienced a shared hallucination, probably carbon monoxide from a faulty furnace. The museum would be inspected. We should both take the next few days off, see a doctor if we felt unwell. But I'd seen what I'd seen. The open case, the moved bodies, and I heard those whispers. I came back to work the following Monday, told myself I imagined it, that the director was right about environmental factors affecting perception. My first round that night, I avoided the third floor entirely. Told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had a job to do. Second round at midnight, I forced myself to go up. The Native Heritage Hall was normal. Cases closed, displays undisturbed, everything exactly as it should be. I walked past the mummy case quickly, not looking directly at it, and headed for the stairs. That's when I heard my name, not whispered, spoken clearly, in perfect English. A woman's voice saying Jake, over and over. Jake, Jake, Jake. I spun around, flashlight sweeping the room, but I was alone. The voice was coming from the display case. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. The mummies were motionless, positioned in their eternal embrace. But the woman's preserved mouth was moving. Tiny movements, barely visible, her jaw working like she was trying to speak after 500 years of silence. The whispers returned, but now I could understand fragments. Trapped, so cold, to wake the child, save the child. The words washed over me, desperate and urgent, and I realized these weren't threats. They were pleas. I checked the educational placard next to the case, reading it properly for the first time in years. The woman and child had been discovered in a permafrost grave, positioned carefully, ritually. But archaeologists had noted something unusual. They'd been buried alive, preserved at the moment of death by the extreme cold. Traditional Inupiat burial practices, the placard said, but there were aspects that didn't align with known customs. I pulled up the original excavation report on my phone, academic papers I never bothered reading, and I found it. A footnote, barely mentioned, about shamanic practices. Some Inupiat shamans, in times of great crisis, would voluntarily enter a death-like state, preserved in permafrost, waiting to wake when they were needed again. The woman hadn't died. She'd been waiting. And now she was trying to wake up, trying to complete whatever purpose had driven her to this suspended state 5 centuries ago. The whispers became a roar in my head, voices speaking over each other, showing me images I couldn't possibly see but somehow did. I saw the village where she lived, saw the sickness that had come, the plague that had killed so many. Saw her make the choice to enter the frozen sleep, taking her child with her, believing she could return someday to heal her people. But she woken in a museum, behind glass, her body too damaged by time and preservation techniques to ever truly live again. Trapped between death and life, conscious but unable to move, screaming in a voice no one could hear for 500 years. I don't remember much of what happened next. The security footage shows me standing in front of the case for 17 minutes, completely motionless, my face blank. Then I walked calmly to the emergency exit, triggered the alarm, and collapsed in the parking lot. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Carbon monoxide poisoning, they said. The museum's furnace had been leaking for weeks, building up to toxic levels. I was lucky to be alive. Mike had quit, couldn't handle the psychological trauma. I was being offered early medical retirement with full benefits. I took it, signed the papers without reading them, took my pension, moved to Seattle to be near my daughter. I haven't been back to Anchorage. Haven't thought about the museum except in nightmares. But last week, I got a package. No return address, just my name and new address written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Anchorage Daily News. The museum had decided to repatriate the mummies, return them to Barrow for proper burial in accordance with tribal wishes. And tucked inside the clipping was a small piece of paper with 2 words written in that same shaky handwriting. Thank you. I don't know who sent it. Don't want to know. But sometimes late at night, I wake up hearing whispers in a language I don't understand. And I remember those 17 minutes I can count for. I remember standing in front of that case, and I wonder what I saw, what she showed me, what passed between us in that time. All I know for certain is the woman and child were buried properly 6 months ago, returned to the permafrost from which they came. And the whispers in the museum stop. The night guards report no more cold spots, no more sounds, no more moving tools or flickering lights. The Native Heritage Hall is quiet now, peaceful, just displays of kayaks and tools and masks, artifacts of a culture that understood things we've forgotten. Things about death and sleep and the space between them. Things about consciousness that can persist in frozen flesh for centuries. Things about what happens when you trap something that was never meant to be caged, and what that thing might do to finally be free. Story 8. Thaw the spring melt revealed 17 bodies along the Richardson Highway, and I helped bury 3 of them the winter before. My name is James Holloway, and in the winter of 1994, I was a long-haul trucker running freight between Fairbanks and Valdez. The Richardson Highway is 364 miles of 2-lane road cutting through some of the most isolated wilderness in Alaska. In winter, it becomes a tunnel of white, snow piled 10 feet high on both sides. Whiteout conditions, avalanche zones, and stretches where you can drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle or any sign of human civilization. It is the kind of road where people disappear and nobody notices until spring. I picked up a hitchhiker on February 9th, just north of Paxson. His name was Dale Kruger, mid-40s, weathered face, worn Carhartt jacket. He said his truck had broken down 20 miles back. Said he had been walking for 3 hours. The temperature was 15 below. I could not leave him out there, so I let him in. Dale was quiet at first. We drove in silence for maybe 30 minutes. Then he started talking. Small talk, where I was from, how long I had been driving. Normal conversation, but something felt off. The way he kept looking at me. Not at the road, not at the scenery, just at me, studying me, like he was calculating something. Around mile marker 200, Dale asked if I had seen the red snow. I had no idea what he meant. He pointed out the window, said there had been reports, patches of red snow appearing along the highway. Some people thought it was algae, Arctic algae blooms that turned snow pink or red. But Dale said he knew better, said the red was blood, said there was a lot more of it than anyone realized, said spring would reveal the truth. I laughed nervously, changed the subject, but Dale kept circling back to it. The red snow, the bodies hidden beneath. The highway is a graveyard. He spoke with a strange certainty, like he had personal knowledge, like he had seen things he should not have seen. We reached Glen Allen around 9 p.m. Dale thanked me for the ride. Got out at the junction. I watched him walk into the darkness toward the cluster of buildings that made up the town. Something about him unsettled me. The way he moved, the things he said. I filed it away as weird but harmless. Another strange encounter on a lonely highway. 3 days later, I was southbound again. Same route. Around mile marker 215, I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder. Hazard lights blinking. A woman standing beside it, waving for help. I pulled over. She said her radiator had overheated. Asked if I could give her a lift to the next town. Her name was Patricia, late 30s. Nervous, she kept looking back at the tree line like she expected something to emerge. I helped her into the cab. As we drove, Patricia told me she was running from someone. She would not say who, just that she had seen something she should not have seen, that someone was following her, that she needed to get to Anchorage, to police, to safety. I told her I could take her as far as Glen Allen. She could call for help there. We were 10 miles from Glen Allen when I saw him. Dale Kruger, standing on the side of the road. Thumb out, hitchhiking again. I slowed down out of instinct. Patricia grabbed my arm, told me not to stop. Her voice was pure panic. She said that was him, the man she was running from. I accelerated past, watched Dale in my mirror. He did not move, just stood there, watching my truck disappear. Patricia was shaking. She told me Dale had offered her a ride 2 days ago. She accepted. They drove north together. Around mile marker 240, Dale pulled over, said he needed to check something in the back. Patricia waited. Then she heard sounds. Digging, scraping. She got out to investigate. Found Dale in the trees beside the road, burying something. Something wrapped in a tarp. Something human-sized. Dale saw her, smiled, asked if she wanted to help. She ran, got to her car and fled south. But her car overheated, broke down, and Dale had been following, on foot, tracking her. She said she had seen 3 other cars pulled over along the highway. Empty, abandoned, all within a 20-mile stretch, all coated with fresh snow that was slightly discolored, slightly pink. She said Dale was killing people, burying them in the snow, using the winter to hide his crimes, waiting for the thaw to scatter the evidence across hundreds of miles of wilderness. I did not want to believe her, but I remembered the way Dale had talked about red snow, about bodies, about truth being revealed in spring. I drove faster. Got Patricia to Glen Allen. She went straight to the Alaska State Troopers post. Filed a report. They were skeptical. No evidence. No bodies. Just the story of a frightened woman and a hitchhiker who gave her bad vibes. But they checked on Dale Kruger anyway. Found him staying at a motel in Glen Allen. Questioned him. He had alibis. Witnesses who had seen him in town on the dates Patricia claimed he was burying bodies. He explained the ride. Said Patricia seemed paranoid. Said she demanded to be let out and ran off. His story was consistent. Reasonable. The troopers had nothing to hold him on. I saw Dale one more time that winter. Late March. I was northbound. He was walking along the highway near mile marker 230. I did not stop. Just watched him in my mirror. He stood there for a long moment. Then walked into the trees. Vanished into the white. Spring came in April. The thaw started slowly. Snow melting. Rivers rising. And then the highway patrol started finding them. Bodies. Scattered along a 100-mile stretch of the Richardson Highway. Partially decomposed. Frozen and thawed repeatedly, buried in shallow graves beside the road. 17 bodies, men and women, ages ranging from 20 to 60, all killed during the winter, all hidden under snow. The forensic analysis was nightmarish. Most victims had been stabbed. Some showed signs of torture. Others appeared to have been kept alive for days before death. The burial sites were crude, shallow, like the killer did not care about concealment, just needed to hide the bodies long enough for winter to pass. Long enough for snow to bury the evidence. Long enough for predators and decomposition to destroy identifying features. Dale Kruger was arrested on April 20th. The evidence was circumstantial at first. Witness statements, his presence in the area, his suspicious behavior, but then they found his storage unit in Fairbanks. Inside were personal effects, wallets, IDs, jewelry, belonged to the victims, trophies. He had kept trophies. Dale confessed during interrogation, not to 17 murders, to 23. 6 bodies were never found. He described his method: hitchhike, gain trust, offer rides, get people alone, then kill them, bury them beside the highway. The vastness of Alaska made it easy. The winter made it invisible. He had been operating for 3 years. 3 winters of killing. 3 springs where thaw revealed nothing because animals scattered remains. Rivers washed away evidence. And nobody connected isolated disappearances across hundreds of miles. But Patricia had seen him. I had seen him. We were witnesses who survived. Lucky witnesses, I testified at his trial, described picking him up, his comments about red snow, his knowledge of bodies. The jury convicted him on all counts. He is serving multiple life sentences at Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward. But here's what keeps me awake. What nobody talks about. When they arrested Dale, he was calm, almost relieved. He told investigators he was tired, that the voices had finally stopped, that for 3 years, something had whispered to him, told him who to kill, where to bury them, how to avoid detection. He said the voices started after he found something in the woods. An old cabin near mile marker 240. Inside was a book, handwritten, filled with names and dates going back to the 1920s. Dale said the book contained instructions, a ritual, a way to feed the highway, to keep it hungry, to maintain some kind of balance. He said the names in the book were all people who had disappeared along the Richardson Highway over 70 years. Hundreds of names. He said he was just continuing the tradition, following the instructions, keeping the highway satisfied. The investigators dismissed this as the ramblings of a psychopath trying to establish an insanity defense. They searched for the cabin, never found it. The book was never recovered. Just another detail in a case full of horror. But I think about it, about the way Dale looked at me that first night, the calculation in his eyes. I was almost a victim, almost a name in that book. Something made him let me live. Some instinct or interruption. And Patricia, she survived by pure chance, by seeing something she should not have seen, by running before Dale could act. I stopped driving the Richardson Highway after the trial. Could not do it anymore. Every mile marker, every pull-off, every stretch of empty road. They all represented potential graves, potential victims. The highway had become a graveyard in my mind. A 300-mile burial ground where snow and isolation had hidden decades of murder. I moved to Washington State, became a local driver, short hauls, populated areas, but I still see red sometimes. Not in snow, but in my memory. The discolored patches Patricia described. The bodies revealed by spring thaw. The blood that had been there all winter. Hidden, waiting, patient. And I think about the book, about the names, about the possibility that Dale was telling the truth. That the Richardson Highway demands sacrifice. That the pattern of disappearances will continue. Different killers, different methods, but same highway, same hunger, same endless winter that hides everything until spring reveals the truth. Last winter, I read about 3 people going missing along the Richardson Highway. Separate incidents, months apart, different circumstances, but all within that same 100-mile stretch where Dale operated. The state troopers say there is no connection, just coincidence. Alaska is vast. People disappear. It happens. But I know better. I know the highway. I know its hunger. And I know that somewhere out there, maybe in a cabin nobody can find, there is a book. And someone is reading it, following instructions, adding names, feeding the road, waiting for winter to hide their work, waiting for spring to reveal just enough to terrify but never enough to stop the pattern. The red snow murders are not over. They never were. Dale was just one chapter, one winter, one killer in a long tradition. And every spring, when the thaw comes, I wait for the news. For the bodies, for proof that the highway is still hungry, still feeding, still demanding blood to stain the melting snow. Story 9. Phantom ship of the Bering Strait. The ship appeared in the ice fog at 3 in the morning. Sails full despite no wind, moving through frozen water that should have crushed its hull to splinters. My name is Robert Hayes, and I am a commercial fisherman from Seattle. They worked the Bering Sea for 18 years, running crab boats through some of the deadliest water on Earth. I've seen rogue waves, capsized vessels, men swept overboard into black water. I thought I understood what the sea could do, what it could take. Then I saw the Phantom ship, and I realized the ocean keeps some things forever. It happened last February during king crab season. We were working the waters near St. Lawrence Island, pushing our luck with late season runs. The ice was already forming, the kind of pack ice that makes navigation deadly. Our skipper, Mike Chandler, wanted one more haul before heading back to Dutch Harbor. One more payday before winter shut everything down. We should have left 2 days earlier. The fog rolled in just after midnight. Not normal fog. This was thick and white and cold in a way that went beyond temperature. It moved wrong, flowed like something alive. Our radar went haywire the moment it hit us. The screen filled with ghost images, phantom returns, shapes that appeared and vanished. Our GPS started showing impossible coordinates, placing us hundreds of miles from where we actually were. Mike slowed us to a crawl. Running blind in pack ice is suicide. We crept forward at 2 knots, the hull groaning as ice scraped along the sides. The crew was on deck with spotlights, watching for bergs. That's when Jimmy Chen saw it. A shape in the fog ahead. Dark, large, moving parallel to us about 200 yards off the port bow. At first we thought it was another fishing vessel, maybe a Russian trawler running without lights. But as we got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a ship, an old ship, a wooden sailing vessel with 3 masts and tattered canvas sails. A schooner from another century. It glided through the ice without sound, without effort, like the frozen sea wasn't even there. Mike grabbed the radio, tried to hail them. No response. We changed course to intercept. The schooner maintained its heading, moving steadily northeast, toward the ice pack, toward water that was completely frozen, water where no wooden ship could possibly sail. We followed it for 20 minutes. The fog grew thicker, the temperature dropped, our instruments went completely dead. Even the compass spun uselessly. Then the fog parted for just a moment, and we saw the ship clearly. The hull was dark with age and rot. The sails were gray rags. The rigging hung loose and tangled. But the worst part was the crew. There were men on deck. Dozens of them, standing perfectly still, not working the lines, not adjusting the sails, just standing there like statues, facing us. Their clothes were from the 1800s. Thick coats and wool hats. Their faces were pale, too pale, white as snow, and even from 200 yards away, I could see their eyes. Black eyes, empty eyes, staring at us without blinking. The fog closed in again. The schooner vanished. We tried to follow, but the ice was too thick. Mike made the call to turn back, to get out of there before we became trapped ourselves. As we came about, I saw something in the water near where the phantom ship had been. Objects floating in the gaps between ice floes. Dark objects. I grabbed binoculars and focused. They were bodies, dozens of them, frozen solid, floating upright in the water like they'd been standing when they froze. Their arms were raised, their mouths were open, their eyes were gone, just black sockets staring at nothing. They wore the same clothing as the crew we'd seen on the schooner. The same thick coats, the same wool hats, but these bodies had been in the water for a long time. Decades, maybe longer. We radioed the Coast Guard, reported what we'd seen. They said they'd send a cutter to investigate, but the weather was too dangerous for immediate response. They'd check it out when conditions improved. We gave them the coordinates and got the hell out of there. Made it back to Dutch Harbor 36 hours later. I couldn't sleep the entire trip. Kept seeing those pale faces, those empty eyes, those bodies frozen upright in the water. When we docked, I started researching, looking for information about old shipwrecks in the Bering Strait, looking for anything that matched what we'd seen. I found it in the archives of the New Bedford Whaling Museum. A schooner called the Covenant, lost in the Bering Strait in November 1891. 37 crew members, no survivors, no wreckage ever found. The Covenant had been hunting bowhead whales, pushing deep into the Arctic as winter approached, ignoring warnings from local Yupik people who said the ice was coming early, who said the northern waters were angry that season, who said things moved in the fog that weren't natural. The captain, a man named Jeremiah Walsh, had been desperate. The voyage had been unprofitable. He needed one more whale, one more kill to make the trip worthwhile. According to the last report from a Russian trading post, the Covenant had sailed north on November 8th. The ice closed in 3 days later. Trappers found the ship in March, frozen solid in the pack ice 60 miles from where it should have been. The hull was intact, the supplies were untouched, but the crew was gone. All 37 men vanished without a trace. No bodies on the ship, no signs of violence, no indication of where they'd gone. Just empty bunks and cold stoves and silence. The report mentioned something else. Something the Russian authorities had dismissed as superstition. The Yupik people claimed to have seen the Covenant after it disappeared, sailing through the fog, moving through ice that should have crushed it. They said the crew was still aboard, still working, still hunting, but they were no longer alive. They'd become something else, something that belonged to the ice now, something that sailed forever in the spaces between the frozen sea and the fog, harvesting not whales but souls, taking anyone foolish enough to follow them into the white. I showed Mike the research. He didn't want to hear it. Said we'd seen another vessel and our instruments had malfunctioned. Said the bodies were from a recent wreck that hadn't been reported yet. Said there was a rational explanation for everything. But I could see the doubt in his eyes, could hear the uncertainty in his voice. He'd seen what I'd seen. He knew it wasn't irrational. 2 weeks later, Mike got a call from the Coast Guard. They searched the coordinates we provided. Found nothing. No ship. No bodies. No evidence anything had been there. The ice in that area had been solid for weeks. Unbroken. Nothing could have sailed through it. They suggested we'd been farther north than we thought. That our GPS had been malfunctioning. That we'd seen ice formations in the fog and our stressed minds had turned them into a ship. But I knew better. I'd seen the Covenant. Seen its crew. Seen what they'd become. And I knew they were still out there. Still sailing. Still searching. Still trying to complete a voyage that had ended over a century ago. Still trapped in that moment when the ice closed in and the fog swallowed them whole. I quit fishing after that season. Told everyone I was retiring early. Moving to somewhere warm. Somewhere far from the ocean. But the truth is I was afraid. Afraid of going back. Afraid of seeing that ship again. Afraid that next time we wouldn't just see it. We follow it. And we end up like the crew of the Covenant. Frozen. Empty. Sailing forever through fog and ice. Neither dead nor alive. Just trapped in the space between. Sometimes I still see it. In my dreams. In reflections on water. The phantom ship gliding silently through impossible ice. The pale crew standing motionless on deck. Watching. Waiting. And I wonder if they re-looking for something specific. If they re-hunting. If they re-trying to complete some final mission that keeps them bound to those frozen waters. Or if they re-just there. Existing. Caught in an endless loop of their final voyage. Doomed to sail forever through the Bering Strait. Forever lost in the fog. Forever trapped in the ice that killed them but one. Let them die. The Yupik people have a word for it. Akla. Spirits that exist between the sea and the ice. Between life and death. Between the world we know and the world we fear. They say the Covenant is an Akla now. The ship and its crew merged into one entity. Neither fully ghost nor fully physical. They say it appears when the conditions are right. When the fog is thick and the ice is forming and the boundary between worlds grows thin. They say it is searching. Always searching. For what? No one knows. Maybe for the whales they never caught. Maybe for a way home. Maybe for new crew to join them in their endless voyage. I've talked to other fishermen since that night. Quietly, carefully, asking if anyone else has seen it. Most one to admit to anything. Don, didn't want to sound crazy, but a few have told me stories. A Russian trawler captain who saw it near the Diomede Islands in 2003. A Coast Guard crew who tracked it on radar in 2011. Watching it sail through solid ice for 3 hours before vanishing. A bush pilot who photographed it from the air in 2015, though his camera malfunctioned and the images came out blank. Everyone who has seen it says the same thing. The ship moves wrong, glides too smoothly, doesn't to react to wind or current. And the crew, always the crew, standing motionless, watching, their faces pale as death, their eyes empty and black, never moving, never speaking, just staring at anyone who sees them, like they rememorizing faces, like they re-keeping track, like they re-waiting for something. I don't to go near the water anymore. Can to even look at the ocean without feeling it. That pull, that whisper, the sense that something out there remembers me, knows my face, knows I saw it. Part of me wonders if that is what the Covenant does. Marks people, claims them, maybe not right away, maybe not for years, but eventually everyone who sees the phantom ship ends up back in those waters. Ends up in the fog, ends up joining the crew, adding their face to the collection of pale watchers who stand forever on that ghostly deck. Sailing through ice that never melts, through fog that never clears, through a voyage that never ends. And I wonder, when my time comes, when I finally can to resist the pull anymore, when I find myself back in the Bering Strait in the middle of winter, will I see the ship again? Will it be waiting? Will the crew finally move? Finally speak? Finally tell me what they want? Or will I just wake up on that deck one morning, standing with the others, pale and cold and empty, forever sailing through the ice, forever trapped in the fog, forever part of the phantom ship that haunts the Bering Strait, the Covenant, still hunting, still searching, still adding to its crew, one soul at a time. Story 10. Ice that bleeds. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in the Brooks Range. When you see blood in ice, your brain tries to rationalize it. Oxidized minerals, algae, some natural explanation that lets you sleep at night. But when that ice whispers your name, when it knows things about you that no one else knows, rationalization becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. I was part of a geological survey team contracted by a mining company in northern Alaska. 3 weeks into our expedition, we were mapping glacial formations about 90 miles north of the Dalton Highway. deep in the Brooks Range where cell service is a distant memory and the nearest town is a collection of prefab buildings that barely qualifies as civilization. The kind of place where nature reminds you that humanity is just a temporary guest. Our lead geologist, Marcus Chan, spotted the anomaly on our fourth day in the field. From a distance, the glacier looked like any other, a massive frozen river flowing between two peaks, blue, white, and ancient. But as we approached, we saw them, fissures running through the ice like veins, except these veins were the color of fresh blood. Not pink, not rust, red, the kind of red you see when you cut yourself shaving, when your body reminds you how fragile you really are. Marcus was excited. I remember that clearly. He kept saying this could be a significant discovery, possibly a new form of extremophile bacteria or an unknown mineral deposit. He had his sampling kit out before we even reached the glacier's edge. The temperature was negative 15 degrees, but he worked with bare hands, too eager to bother with gloves. I stood back with Sarah Newland, our junior surveyor, watching him drill into one of the crimson fissures. The sound the drill made was wrong. Not the usual grinding of metal against ice, but something softer, almost organic. Like drilling into flesh. Sarah heard it too. I saw her flinch, saw her take a step back. Marcus didn't seem to notice. He was lost in his work, collecting samples in sealed containers, labeling them with shaking hands that I thought was from the cold. That night in our camp, Marcus couldn't sleep. None of us could, really, but Marcus was different. He sat by the propane heater, staring at the samples, the crimson substance now separated from the ice in small vials. It looked thicker than water, more viscous, and it moved in the containers even when they sat perfectly still. Not flowing, moving, like something alive adjusting its position. Around 3 a.m, Marcus started talking. Not to us, to himself, or maybe to something we couldn't see. He kept saying he remembered being cold. So cold his bones turned to glass. He described being trapped somewhere dark and frozen, feeling his blood slow in his veins until it stopped moving altogether. The thing is, Marcus grew up in San Diego. He never experienced real cold until he joined our team 6 months earlier. By dawn, Sarah was sick too. Fever, but her skin was cold to the touch. She kept scratching at her arms, saying her veins hurt, saying she could feel something moving through them that wasn't blood. I checked her temperature, 94.3 degrees. Hypothermic, except we were inside a heated tent and she was wrapped in a thermal sleeping bag. I made the call to evacuate. We packed up camp, loaded Marcus and Sarah into the snowmobiles, and started the 8-hour journey back to the highway. Marcus was barely conscious by then, mumbling about ice palaces and frozen courts, about serving something that lived in the deep cold. Sarah was worse. She stopped talking entirely, just stared ahead with eyes that had taken on a strange milky quality, like cataracts forming in real time. We were 3 hours into the journey when I noticed the blood. Not from a wound, from their pores, tiny red beads forming on their skin, squeezing out like sweat, except it was the same color as the substance in the glacier. The same color as the samples Marcus had collected, which were still in his pack, still in those sealed containers. I stopped the convoy. I needed to figure out what was happening. That's when I heard it. A sound like wind. Except there was no wind. The air was perfectly still, the kind of stillness that only exists in extreme cold. But this sound, it was moving through the ice around us, through the snow, through the frozen ground itself. And it was forming words. Not English, not any language I recognized, but somehow I understood it. It was calling, not to me, to Marcus and Sarah, and they were answering. Marcus opened his eyes, those clouded, distant eyes, and smiled. Sarah sat up in her sled, moving with a strange fluidity, and turned her head toward the glacier we left behind, several miles to the north. They started walking, just stood up and started walking back toward the Brooks Range, toward that bleeding ice. I tried to stop them, grabbed Marcus by the arm, and that is when I felt it. His skin was hard, not frozen, not quite, but changing, crystallizing. I could feel the structure of his cells shifting under my grip. Organic matter becoming something else, something that belonged to the cold. I let go. I watched them walk away into the white expanse. I didn't. Do you follow? I couldn't. Whatever was in that glacier, whatever had bled into those fissures for God knows how long, it had claimed them. They were going home, back to something older than the mountains, older than the ice itself. I made it to the highway alone, reported Marcus and Sarah missing. A search team went out, never found them. They found our camp, found the drill site, found the glacier. But the fissures were gone. The ice was solid blue-white, pristine, showing no trace of red. The samples Marcus collected, still in his pack at the camp, were empty. Just clear water in sealed vials. The mining company shut down the project, classified the whole expedition as a tragic accident. They never asked too many questions, and I learned not to provide too many answers. But I think about it every day. I think about what Marcus said, about being trapped in ice, about his veins running with something that wasn't blood. The thing is, he said that before he got sick. He said it like he was remembering something, not predicting something. 3 months after I returned, I started having the dreams. Nothing dramatic at first, just cold, a sensation of being somewhere dark and frozen, of time moving differently, of waiting. Then the dreams became more specific. I saw the glacier again, saw those crimson fissures opening like wounds, like mouths. I saw things moving inside the ice, shapes that might have been human once, might have been something else entirely. And I saw myself among them, waiting, serving, part of something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. Last week, I woke up with blood on my pillow. Not from my nose, not from my mouth, from my pores. Tiny red beads that looked exactly like what I'd seen coming from Marcus and Sarah. It only happened once, just that morning, but it was enough. I knew what it meant. I knew what was happening. I am in my apartment in Anchorage now, writing this down, trying to get it all out before I can anymore. The temperature outside is 30 degrees, practically tropical for Alaska, but I'm cold. So cold my bones feel like glass, and I can feel something in my veins. Something that I said, the blood, something that moves with purpose. It hurt. That's the worst part. It feels natural, like this is what I was always meant to become. There, a map on my wall, a detailed topographical map of the Brooks Range. I bought it yesterday, though I don't remember deciding to buy it. There, a mark on it, a small red X, right where that glacier sits between two unnamed peaks. I've been staring at it for hours. It's calling to me, not with sound, but with something deeper, something that bypasses my ears and speaks directly to whatever I'm becoming. I think I understand now. The ice doesn't bleed. It harvests. It collects. Every prospector, every surveyor, every person who gets close enough to see those crimson fissures, they not finding something. They being found, being selected, being prepared. Tomorrow, I am going to rent a car and drive north. I am going to take the Dalton Highway as far as it goes, then continue on foot. I am going to find that glacier again, going to walk into those red fissures, and I am going to discover what Marcus and Sarah discovered. What countless others have discovered over centuries, maybe millennia. I am going to learn what lives in the deep cold, what bleeds through ancient ice, what turns human flesh into crystal and blood into something older than blood. I am writing this as a warning, but also as an invitation. If you rereading this, if you re-listening to these words, then you've already heard the call. You felt it the moment I described those crimson fissures. You felt something in your chest, in your blood, recognizing itself. The ice is patient. The ice is everywhere. And the ice is always bleeding, always calling, always waiting for those who are ready to come home to the cold. My veins hurt, but it's a good hurt, a purposeful hurt. I think I'm ready to go home now. Story 11. Circle. I need to tell you something about Alaska that nobody talks about. Something the Park Service will never admit. Something that ended my career as a search and rescue coordinator and left me checking my locks 3 times every night. It started on November 3rd, 2 years ago, when a helicopter pilot radioed in about something wrong in the Chugach Mountains. He was doing a routine supply run when he spotted them from the air. 6 people sitting in a perfect circle on a plateau about 40 miles north of Anchorage. He said they looked like they were meditating or performing some kind of ceremony. When he circled back for a second look, he noticed something that made his voice crack over the radio. They were too still. Nobody was moving, not even a little. We launched the rescue operation within the hour. I led a team of 4 up the mountain, expecting to find hypothermia victims, maybe a religious group that had miscalculated the weather. November in the Chugach is unforgiving. Temperatures dropped to 20 below without warning. The wind can strip flesh from bone. But what we found up there was not hypothermia. What we found was not anything I had seen in 15 years of pulling bodies out of the Alaskan wilderness. They were sitting in a perfect circle, just like the pilot said. 6 hikers, 3 men and 3 women, arranged with mathematical precision. Each person sat cross-legged, hands resting on their knees, backs straight. They faced inward toward the center of the circle, where the snow was completely undisturbed. Pristine, like whatever happened to them had avoided that one spot entirely. The first thing I noticed was how perfect their posture was. When people freeze to death, they curl up. They fight it. They try to conserve warmth. These people looked like statues, like they had been posed. The second thing I noticed was that they had no faces. I do not mean their faces were damaged or destroyed. I mean the skin had been removed, completely, surgically. From hairline to chin, ear to ear, the skin was just gone. What remained was raw subcutaneous tissue, frozen solid, with every muscle fiber and facial structure exposed in horrifying detail. Their eyes were still there, wide open, staring at the center of the circle. Their teeth were visible in permanent grimaces. But here's what made my hands shake so badly I could barely key my radio. There was no blood. None. Not on their clothes. Not on the snow around them. Not anywhere. The exposed tissue was clean, almost professionally clean, as if the skin had been removed in a sterile environment and then they had been transported here and arranged. My team stood in silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. Finally, Jenkins, the youngest member of my crew, walked closer to examine one of the bodies. He leaned down near a woman in a red jacket and immediately jerked backward. She was warm, not frozen solid like she should have been after sitting in -20-degree weather. Warm. We checked the others, all of them. Same thing. Their core temperatures were hovering around 70 degrees. They had been dead for hours, maybe longer based on rigor mortis, but their bodies were warm. That is when I noticed the tracks, or rather, the complete absence of tracks. The snow around the circle showed only our footprints and the helicopter skids from where it had landed nearby. There were no tracks leading to the circle. None leaving it. The 6 hikers had somehow materialized in this spot without walking here. We documented everything, took hundreds of photographs, called in the state police and the FBI. By the time the forensics team arrived, the bodies had finally started to freeze, temperature dropping to match the environment like they had been releasing stored heat. The autopsies revealed nothing useful. The skin had been removed with precision that suggested surgical tools, but there were no tool marks, no evidence of cutting at all. The pathologist used the word separated instead of removed, like the skin had simply detached from the underlying tissue without trauma. Toxicology came back clean. No drugs, no poisons, no evidence of any substance that might explain their condition. Their identities came back quickly. 2 couples from Seattle, a solo hiker from Portland, and a wildlife photographer from Fairbanks. None of them knew each other. They had not planned a hike together. According to their families and the timestamps on their permit applications, they had entered the park on different days, through different trailheads, heading in different directions. There was no reason for them to be in that spot together. The plateau where we found them was not on any established trail. It was not marked on maps. It was not scenic or significant in any way. Just a flat patch of rock and ice in the middle of nowhere. The photographer, his camera was still around his neck. We developed the film, hoping for answers. The last photo showed the circle. He had photographed it before becoming part of it. The image showed 5 people already sitting in position, faceless, and empty space where the 6th person would complete the pattern. The angle suggested the photographer had taken the picture and then walked into that empty space and sat down. But the photograph raised more questions than it answered. The timestamp indicated it was taken at 2:17 in the afternoon. But the lighting was wrong. The sun angle in the photo matched sunset, not mid-afternoon. And in the background, barely visible, there was something else. A shape, tall and thin, standing perhaps 50 yards away, watching. When we enhanced the image, the shape became less clear, not more. It seemed to shift and blur the more we tried to focus on it, like it existed just outside the photograph, its ability to capture it. One analyst said it looked like a person. Another said it looked like a tree. I thought it looked like neither and both. The official report classified the deaths as exposure with unexplained circumstances. The case was closed within 6 weeks. Too many inconsistencies, Too much strangeness that did not fit into acceptable categories of evidence. The families were told their loved ones had died of hypothermia and the facial injuries were the result of predation. Even though no predator removes skin that cleanly and no predator arranges bodies in geometric patterns. I was encouraged to stop asking questions. When I did not, I was encouraged to take early retirement. When I refused that, I was offered a transfer to a desk job in Juneau processing paperwork. I took the retirement, but I could not leave it alone. I started researching the location where we found them. It took months of digging through old records and archives, talking to indigenous elders and retired park rangers. What I found was a pattern. Every 7 years, going back at least 60 years, someone disappears in that area. Usually hikers, sometimes hunters or photographers, always in November, always during the new moon. The bodies are almost never found. The ones that have certain features. Missing skin, arranged in patterns. No tracks leading to or from the scene. The local Ina people have a name for that area. They call it the place where the sky touches wrong. They will not go there. They say something lives in that spot that is not from here. Something that watches and waits and sometimes reaches through to take what it needs. I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but then I started receiving the letters. They came every few weeks, always postmarked from different cities across the country, always handwritten in different styles, always containing the same basic message. People writing to tell me they had dreamed about the circle. Vivid, identical dreams of sitting in the snow, facing inward, waiting for something to arrive from the center. They described the cold, the darkness, the feeling of their skin separating from their faces like a mask being gently lifted away. They woke up terrified but could not remember what they had seen at the center of the circle. These people had no connection to the case. Most had never even been to Alaska. But they were all planning trips. They felt pulled to visit the Chugach Mountains. They could not explain why. They just knew they needed to go. I tried to warn them. I called the ones who included return addresses. Some listened. Most did not. They said the pull was too strong. They said they saw the location in their dreams so clearly they could navigate to it without a map. 3 of them never came home from their trips. I am telling you this because November is here again. The new moon is in 4 days. I have been receiving more letters than usual. 23 in the last month alone. All from people who do not know each other. All describing the same dream. All planning trips to Alaska. And I have started having the dream too. I see the circle. I see the 5 spaces already filled, the bodies sitting in perfect stillness, faces gone, eyes staring at the center. I see the 6th space, the empty one, and I know, with the certainty that only exists in dreams, that the space is mine. I bought a plane ticket to Anchorage yesterday. I do not know why. I do not want to go, but every night the pull gets stronger. The dream gets clearer. I can feel the cold now when I wake up, even though my bedroom is warm. I can feel something at the edges of my vision, tall and thin and wrong, waiting for me to complete the pattern. I am leaving tomorrow. I will hike to the plateau. I will find the circle, and I think, when I get there, I will finally understand what lives at the center. What has been waiting there for 60 years or longer? What needs us to sit and face inward so it can reach through and take what it needs? The worst part is not the fear. The worst part is the relief I feel. Like I am finally going to understand something vast and terrible and true. Like whatever removes our faces is also removing something else. Some burden or boundary that separates us from what we are supposed to see. I am leaving this account with my lawyer. If I do not return by November 10th, he will release it. Maybe someone will read it and understand. Maybe someone will finally do what I could not and find a way to stop it. Or maybe you are reading this because you have started having the dreams too. Maybe you're already planning your trip, buying your ticket, packing your gear. Maybe you can already feel the pull, the certainty, the relief. If that is you, I want you to know something. I do not think we are victims. I think we are chosen, selected, called, and whatever is waiting at the center of the circle has been waiting a very long time for us to finally sit down and look. I will see you there. And so the whisper fades into the wind. Alaska keeps its secrets under ice, but sometimes, for a moment, it lets us peek inside. If you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell. More true stories and legends wait in the dark. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from or if you felt the chill of something unexplainable yourself. Share it in the comments. Midnight Whispers isn't just a channel, it's a campfire across the miles, burning in the endless night. Until next time, stay warm and keep your lights low.